By the way, good luck, Paula. Have a great day.
Dave, at 8:30, you can start the meeting.
Will do. Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order. Good morning, everybody. Happy Election Day. I hope you all have voted, and if you haven't, you have a little less than 8 hours to get back out there and do it today. So make your vote count. I'm going to start with item 2, the roll call of the Board of Members. Director Perotti.
Present, here.
Director McCrory is absent. Director Weinberg.
I'm here.
Director Rodriguez.
Present.
Director Shaler.
Present.
Vice Chair Tabor.
Here.
And Chair Davis. So we have a quorum, and we will move to the report regarding the post of the agenda. Mr. Strada, do you have a report on that?
I do. The agenda was posted Friday, October 30th, 2020 at MTD's administrative office, mailed and emailed to those on the agenda list and posted on MTD's website.
Good, thank you very much. That takes us then to the consent calendar. There are 2 items on consent. Item 4, the approval of the prior minutes for the meeting of October 20th, 2020. Item 5, this is the cash report for the periods October 10th through October 23rd, 2020. Are there any questions on either of these items? Not hearing any questions, or is there a motion for approval?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
A motion by we have a motion by Vice Chair Tabor, seconded by Director Rodriguez. I will do a roll call on that. Director Perotti?
Aye.
Director McCrory is absent. Director Weinberg?
Here.
Director Rodriguez?
Yes.
Director Sheeler?
Yes.
Vice Chair Tabor?
Yes.
Chair Davis votes yes. The consent calendar is approved. Thank you very much. That takes us to item 6, the public comment. This is an item where for people in the public to speak on items not on today's agenda. Mr. Estrada, is there anyone who wishes to speak in this regard?
I have no request for comment.
Okay, no request under item 6, public comment. Takes us to our first regular agenda item, item 7. This is the zero emission bus power modeling report. General Manager Estrada, you want to start us off?
Yes, pleased to bring this to the board, this particular item. It was the final deliverable from Stantec on our facilities master plan. MTD had requested, based on the facilities master plan, it was clear that there was enough information to put together a power modeling report, which is critical information for MTD to eventually prepare its ZEB rollout plan for the state of California that's due, I believe, in a year or so. So this is a good opportunity for us. It's information that's critical, and I'm going to hand it off to Mr. Grip to introduce the Stantec team and share the results.
General
Morning,
Manager
Mr.
Estrada, thank you very much for the introduction. Members of the board, good morning. So as General Manager Estrada mentioned, we hired Stantec to put together a facilities master plan. And the ZEB power modeling report is a component of that facilities master plan. And really the aim was to identify 2 major components that kind of came from the facilities master plan. One of which is, what are the power requirements for having a fully electrified fleet at terminals 1 and 2? And secondly, based upon current battery electric bus technology, how does that fare with MTD's current routing? Meaning that if we were to have an all-electric bus fleet tomorrow, how does that translate over to our existing routing that we're providing to the customer? So without further ado, I'd like to introduce project lead from Stantec, David Verbich. He's going to provide you with a presentation about the report, as well as answer any questions that the board may have. So, David?
Thank you, Ryan. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us today. I'd like to introduce some other folks on the line from Stantec who are part of the team. We have Sasha Pejic, who's on the line, as well as Annalie Castillo, who's also on the Stantec team. So I'll get right into it. So as Ryan was mentioning, this is a study that builds off of some previous work that we've done at Stantec, looking at the facilities master plan and coming up with a ZEB strategy to help electrify MTD's current bus service. So if we can just go to the next slide, please. So here's an overview of our agenda for today. So we'll recap the scope. We'll get into some of the details of the bus modeling and route simulation, as well as the results and some of our findings and recommendations. And we're happy to answer questions if anything is unclear as we go through the presentation. Next slide, please. So the scope involved us collecting data, reviewing the previous findings that we had from the facilities master plan study that we wrapped up relatively recently. And so with having that understanding, we can then get to estimating energy requirements for an all-electric fleet with the modeling of bus performance. That means looking at the bus specs, driving cycles, and other inherent characteristics of operations for bus service in the MTD service area to understand first route level energy requirements and then aggregating it up to basically a vehicle block, which is what a vehicle does in a day. And then at the vehicle level to understand what energy is required for those vehicles, translating that into the power demand for each facility, i.e. Terminal 1 in Santa Barbara and then Terminal 2 in Goleta. And then finally providing a recommendation in terms of energy requirements and some of the fleet configuration requirements. So if we go to the next slide, we can start getting into the initial data review, which is the first step. Next slide, please. So this figure comes from our operations analysis, and it's basically to show that MTD operates, at least pre-COVID, a variety of different service patterns. So there's weekdays with school, there's weekdays without school, there's Saturday, Sunday service, there's summertime service, there's different operating patterns, which makes it tricky in a way to determine a typical day to do bus modeling, because we had to choose a day where service was more on the extreme end, so we can understand the power requirements. So what we chose along with MTD staff is to look at a typical school weekday, which was October 14th, 2019. So pre-COVID, and that's when most of your buses are out, when most of the service was operated. There's schools in session, so a lot of demand. So this is planning for that level of service. Next slide, please. And then this slide shows that MTD's vehicles, or at least its dispatching, is somewhat complex because of the different vehicle varieties that MTD uses, including 29-foot buses, the 40-foot buses, a few 60-footers, as well as the electric buses currently operated for some service. The current yard is very constrained, so we know that there's little space to work with, and that we know that the peak vehicle requirement is in the afternoon due to school demand and student demand. So now that we understand how the vehicles are currently dispatched and operate, how the operations occurs at the current yard, then we were able to build upon that and to pivot that into a BEB analysis and study. And so if we go to the next slide, what you see is our initial insights into BEB study from the previous work from the facility master plan, which is understanding of the block mileage, i.e. how much, what's the sort of operating range that we typically see in a day for MTD service. And so what's plotted here on the graph on the right is the mileage for each block on a typical day of MTD service. And the red dashed line is the sort of upper limit of what a current battery electric bus can do, which is about 180 miles. So what we can see is that for most part, MTD service falls below that. So that's a good sign. It means that it can be done well with only plug-in depot charging battery electric buses. However, there's that portion to the right that surpasses this threshold. So there need to be some strategies to deal with that portion of service. And then we'll get into that in a few slides. So next slide, please. Now that we've understood the operating background and information related to the fleet and the facilities, we then turn to the bus modeling and route simulation. Next slide, please. Stantec uses a proprietary tool called ZebDecide, which is a multifaceted tool that we use to do several things. And one of the things we use it to do is to look at how much energy a bus will need to complete some service based on operating profiles, based on bus specs, and then several other characteristics, basically to understand the fuel economy of a bus, an electric bus or a hydrogen bus. In this case, for Santa Barbara MTD, we're looking at battery electric buses that plug in and charge in depot only. And so the graphic here shows the inputs that go into the predictive bus modeling and route simulation. So that includes bus specs. So those are the bus specs that we've got from MTD and an understanding of vehicle weights and those type of characteristics. The driving cycles, which are very important to understanding how a bus operates in a service area. And what I mean by driving cycles is understanding what portion of certain routes are more start and stop, which portions of routes are without stops, for example, if they go along a freeway. Basically how a bus operates in terms of speed and time, which has a big impact on the fuel economy of a bus. We also look at ambient conditions, and what we mean by ambient conditions are temperature, because we know that that impacts how much air conditioning or heating you're using on the bus, and that impacts battery use and therefore the range, the operating range that you have of a battery electric bus. And finally, we also look at passenger loads using actual data from MTD's historic of that date that we were discussing in October to understand the weight added by passengers, which will also impact the operating range of a BEB. Can we go to the next slide, please? So just to get into a few more details about the bus specs, the bus specs, as we see on the slide, depend on a few things, such as the curb weight, the frontal dimensions. So that impacts how the bus moves through space and therefore how much energy it requires. Auxiliaries, if there's other, energy or power demanding elements on the bus, as well as the HVAC. And so we combine this then with looking at driving cycles, and we're able to predict how much energy is required to move the bus for a certain route, and then working our way up to blocks and vehicles. Next slide, please. As a recap, the bus specifications that we were working with, or the assumption was a 40-foot New Flyer BEB with a battery capacity of 524 kilowatt hours. The curb weight is there, it's a heavy bus. And then we are assuming again that it was only in-depot charging. Next slide, please. And this is a schematic of how we came to the whole energy profile. And basically, the first step is to look at each of your routes, assign representative driving cycles. We worked with MTD staff to come to agreements using the different representative drive cycles for each route. And then we aggregate each of the driving cycles to get fuel economy for each route. And this includes for different passenger loading levels, for different HVAC uses, and so on. We also accounted for deadheading because that's an important factor that impacts operating range. So it's not just the amount of time or mileage a bus does in service, it's also the deadhead mileage for a bus to get to its first stop or to interline between routes. And then eventually we aggregate it up from the route, from the trip to the block level, which is what the bus does when it's out of the garage. And then we roll it up to the vehicle level because several of MTD's service blocks are, several of MTD's vehicles do several blocks in a day, i.e. it's not just one block to one vehicle, it's several blocks to a vehicle. So really understanding what the vehicle is doing on a typical day is important for finding out what's the energy requirement, how much of it is feasible to do with a battery electric bus plug-in, and what's the impact on the facilities. Next slide, please.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I have trouble understanding how the electric power originates at wherever your power station is, gets to the bus at varying levels depending on what your power load is or your requirements are, without any wires or anything. Is it like a radio thing and then the motor gets varying amounts of power as it goes?
So the idea is very simply, you would charge your bus in the yard. You plug it into a charger, you recharge it like charging a phone for several hours, and then it leaves the yard full. And eventually what the modeling will show us is how much energy it will use on a typical vehicle assignment, comes back to the yard, and then you plug it in to charge. Is that your question? Maybe I misunderstood.
Yeah, but it sounds like the power is variable to each bus as it needs it. And it's a little confusing, a little hard to visualize in my mind, because I know you take a TV set and you give it 110 volts,
Mm-hmm.
and then it has its own controls with the TV to do what it needs to do. But it sounds like this, is that the way the buses work?
Dick, I think this question, I'd rather have staff come back and just talk to us about bus technology and how it works, rather than try to explain it, to allow them to get through their presentation, if you don't mind.
Okay, I accept.
Okay, good. David, you want to continue, please? Thank you for trying to explain that.
Sure, I can take one last stab if that pleases you. If that's
Go ahead. Take one last stab.
I'll try to. Essentially, it's like filling up your gas tank, right? You put in $50 of gas or whatever the gallons that is, and then your car, as you're driving it, has different fuel economy along the way, right? Depending if you're in freeway that's moving at 50 miles per hour versus a freeway that's moving 25 miles per hour, or you're driving on a narrow street in Goleta that you're starting and stopping. So the amount of gas in your tank is the same. It's just your fuel economy changes. So if you're driving obviously on a highway at a cruising speed, you'll get much further, right? You have a better fuel economy versus if you're starting and stopping. So it's the same with the electricity. We put, you charge your battery, and then throughout the day it has varying levels of fuel economy, which we're going to touch into. And then that sort of determines how much operating mileage you have. I hope that was.
It's a good start. Thank you.
That really helps. Thanks.
Okay. So the results are on the next slide. If we go to the next slide, please. So the first analysis, as I was saying, was the block analysis, i.e. what the blocking, to look at the fuel economy of the blocking. And so this is where we sort of touch on that. If you look at the right, there's the table that says fuel economy. And what the output is a kilowatt hours per mile, kind of like miles per gallon, if you could picture it that way. And so this shows you the range. So the minimum, so a good fuel economy is lower, worse fuel economy is higher, i.e. it takes more power or energy, to move the bus a mile. So the minimum is 2, the maximum is about 2.43. You got an average of about 2.3. All this to say is when we look at how successful MTD's current service is as blocked, current pre-coronavirus, we look and you see on the graph on the right that the vast majority of the service is successful, And that's, of course, assuming that we can charge the bus, get the bus out, and everything goes well. The block analysis, again, shows that you have a small portion that's unsuccessful. And we've also broken it down to the blocks that would be assigned to Terminal 1, and then a number of hypothetical blocks that could be assigned to Terminal 2. So Stantec worked with MTD staff to get an understanding, a high-level understanding of what blocks or what trips or routes, can be operated out of Goleta, i.e. those best suited to serve that portion of the service area. Again, this was a high-level stab at that. And then we pivoted, so if we go to the next slide, from a block analysis to a vehicle assignment analysis. Again, just to remind some folks is that some of the vehicles do more than one block in a day, so that can change how the outcome. And so when we look at the vehicle, what a vehicle does, and we look at the amount of time it has between blocks and et cetera, what we can see is that still the vast majority of service is successful by plugging in the bus and charging in the depot only. But there are several blocks, about let's say about 10 or so, that are unsuccessful, and that would need a new strategy. So if we go to the next slide, what we found is that there, as I mentioned, there are about 10 vehicle assignments that are unsuccessful at a 1-to-1 replacement with a diesel bus when you consider the 424 kilowatt hour battery electric bus. So we worked with MTD staff to discuss options and strategies and a preferred path forward to electrify that unsuccessful service. And so what we came up with was the concept that the unsuccessful assignments would be reblocked, basically creating new vehicle assignments. So the idea is that the number of vehicles would remain the same, because that small portion that's unsuccessful would just be covered off by another vehicle that has perhaps less service in a day. So kind of creating sub blocks that you can then tack onto another portion to complete that service with the same total vehicle complement. And I should mention that this is for the service that's operated by the vehicles that are not the BYD electric buses, i.e. the service that is not electrified presently. This is what we're modeling. Next slide, please. So once we understand the electrical needs of the buses, and we understand where the buses go for the facilities, we could build a charging profile for each facility based on the energy requirements of the buses, the number of buses, and their dispatching schedule, so we can build what's called a charging profile. So then we can then understand the power requirements at a facility to help inform your electrical engineers, your architects, and so on when they come to design and build out the electrical infrastructure for a facility. Next slide, please. So here we're showing figure 1, which has, terminal 1. If we assume that a portion of vehicles that are best suited to serving the western portion of the service area to Goleta. And so we have a smaller portion of vehicles at Terminal 1. If we look at the orange shaded portion in the graphs, what you see is the power requirements by hour of the day for the portion of service that would be operated by the New Flyer buses. And then the gray is from the BYD buses that MTD currently operates. And what you can see is that this power requirement fluctuates over the day. So overnight or in the early morning hours when your buses are still plugged in, you're using at a maximum 1.5 megawatts of power. And then of course, as buses start going into service, you're unplugging the buses and the power requirements drop. And then you see another large spike sort of in the early afternoon. And this is when the buses, after they've returned, they've been plugged in to charge for the evening or the afternoon service. And that's when the buses would come back online, i.e. you unplug them. And then at the end of the day, around 9 p.m., once buses start returning from their evening routes, we plug them back in to charge them overnight. And then this cycle repeats itself. If we go to the next slide, this is what the charging profile would look like if vehicles weren't relocated to Goleta, i.e. the worst case scenario, all your buses are at Terminal 1 and you need to charge them. And this shows that the charging profile would require 2 megawatts of power above that 1.5 that we had in the previous slide. And so again, you can see this profile over time that shows that when the buses are in the yard and you're plugging them in and you're charging them, that's when the power is high. And then of course, when they're out in service, you're not plugging them in, they're not charging, and the power requirement is lower for the facility. Next slide, please. And this is for the hypothetical vehicles and routes that operate out of Terminal 2. So again, this is showing that you would need 1.5 megawatts of power at your facility. And that's what, that would be what it would be designed for. And you can see again, that same sort of shape profile where you have in the early morning, you've got the charging that's going on from overnight. And then the buses go into service, so you have very little power requirements. And then in the evening, when the buses start returning, you need to charge them again overnight for their service the next day. Next slide, please. So these are the recommendations or key findings. Next slide. So as we discussed, there was that portion of service that will need to be reblocked to accommodate the limitations of battery electric buses, i.e. the fact that they can't operate to the same extent as current diesel technologies. So that small portion of service that exceeded that threshold that we discussed earlier will need to be reblocked and re-strategized to cover off that portion of service. The fleet electrification will require about 1.5 megawatts of power at each of the facilities to accommodate electrification. And that's one of the main conclusions of this study that help inform decision-making going forward for the facilities. And reactivating Goleta would help offset the power requirements and space requirements at Terminal 1 if all of the vehicles are stored there. The power requirements are higher, and obviously space is tighter because you have to install the chargers, which also eat up floor space. So again, I'd like to thank the board for allowing us to present this, and I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have. Thank you.
Okay, Pablo, you want to take me back out so I can see everybody? And at this point, we will go to board comment and questions.
Chair Davis.
Yeah, I can't see you, so you're gonna have to speak up. Director Rodriguez.
Okay. Some of this was Greek to me, but it now makes sense after your report. And thank you very much for that. And I just want to, and I'm obviously, I know not an expert in this field. I don't know if any of us are. There might be a few in the group, but when it comes to the charging profile, how long can we count on that charging profile to be accurate? Just like you were saying, you know, we plug in our cell phone. The first couple of years, it's really great. And we know that with batteries, you know, the batteries become less efficient. How long would this analysis be good for the organization? Is it a 2 years, or a 3 year, a 5 year? When do we have to reassess? When batteries become more efficient? Well, do you know what I'm trying to ask?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So batteries are becoming more efficient. They're trying to pack more battery storage onto buses so that you can go further, as well as the chargers are getting better with time. So you're right. This is sort of a moving target. This is, you know, the best approach that we have and best analysis and strategy that we have currently, and looking at, you know, several years ahead. But in terms of when we need to reassess, I would assume it'd be as you start, you know, acquiring buses. So you acquire a batch of buses, install your chargers, do the charging, and then see where it goes from there. Obviously, this is a guide. I think 1.5 megawatts is probably a safe zone. And so that I hope I answered your question, but it is definitely one of those things that it needs to be reassessed as we go along.
And this is the standard that is used to do this type of analysis, I mean, throughout the industry?
Correct. Correct.
Thank you.
If I might add, sorry, David.
No,
Do you
no.
mind if I add something to it?
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. So also regarding your question, the degradation of the batteries, it's also important to note that manufacturers have a 12-year warranty or a certain mileage in the bus. So if the efficiency of the battery drops below 80%, there is an automatic either a reassessment of the battery or replacement of it. So there's always going to be like a threshold of efficiency where your buses cannot go below that point, and that will reflect on the range that you have, and obviously the time of charging that will also affect the charging profile, as you alluded to. So just important to notice that that is included there. And I believe also David alluded that during the presentation, but there's the need of having a charging managing software that would allow you to dedicate how many hours of charging to the buses, and that would also help mitigate that you can stay below the 1.5 of whatever threshold that is assigned to that charging profile. So even if you need to charge for longer periods of time, the charging manager software can allow for that charging to occur in the limit that has been set, in this case, 1.5. So those will be two additional considerations that are related to your question.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Director Sheeler. Bill, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm not an architect or an electrical engineer either, but I did take Barry Schuyler's energy class at UCSB, which was helpful in reviewing this excellent report. For me, it's kind of unfortunate that we didn't get an opportunity to view this maybe at fleet facilities, because there's really a lot in it that is of interest. And I know in the interest of time, I'm going to hold back on a lot of the questions that I had, but I do have a few questions. So I'd appreciate it if you folks would bear with me for just a little while here. And as I'm going through the report, I'm going to kind of do this sequentially. Regarding the proprietary software, Zeb Decide, who has the ability to adjust the inputs so that we can do adaptive management? Will we be dependent upon Stantec to continue to adjust the inputs, or will this be something that will be trained to do internally?
Jerry or Ryan?
Yeah, I'll respond. Obviously, at this stage, we'll be putting out our Zeb. We've contracted with Stantec. They provide us with this information, and it's essentially a benchmark going forward for us. As we reassess going down the line, if we need to contract with someone like Stantec or others, we will do so. But internally, we will make whatever adjustments we need to and do the appropriate analysis at the right time.
Okay. My next question talks about, it's an assumption, it's the cost per kilowatt hour, and also bringing into time of use at some point also. And it was quoting the information on cost per kilowatt hour from Southern California Edison. And maybe I'm incorrect in my understanding, but when we move to C3 Energy in Goleta, they will be the ones that will set the rates and the time of use, and maybe more supportive of what we're endeavoring to do because of their charter than Southern California Edison. Same thing with Santa Barbara when they create their own community choice energy. And just wondering, is that true that the information that we're getting from Edison now may be supplanted by a new set of rates that's brought into effect by community choice energy?
I think that's a good question. At this point, the rates are, I mean, so SCE obviously has a fleet electrification rate, but that may change with time, especially as more fleets are electrified, and we find that we need more energy for the grid, or at different times, or trying to stem electricity requirements. So, I mean, at a high level, I would imagine that this evolves over time. I'd ask Annalie to maybe chime in here with her expertise in working with the utilities.
Let me just comment, because I think Bill's question goes to the fact that we've had 2 community choice aggregators form, which covers our district. Their rates have not yet been set. So in the next year or 2, they will be setting rates, which may, what I think Bill's question is, change what those assumptions might be on rates. Okay, so.
Gotcha.
Annalie, any comment?
Just in the sense that at least if it falls into Edison jurisdiction and it's up to them, it's been pretty standard for them to adopt the same EV rate as long as it's fleet and you compile with the requirements. In this case, you guys will be with the 1.5 megawatts of power demand that will automatically put you into the EV 8 or 9 rates. So, but yeah, further than that, I wouldn't have much insight. It's just we had a project in Anaheim, and the Anaheim Public Utility was working with with ATN to set a rate structure that was somewhat similar to what Edison had proposed. So they are smaller utility companies that kind of like follow the lead of the big ones in terms of like eliminating power demands, which significantly impacts your rate, and having the cheapest structure for the off-peak charging, which is usually after 9 p.m. So it will be similar to what we model.
Thank you for that. My next question has to do with blocks that cannot be successfully converted. So understanding of blocks, I learned more about blocks in your report than I had understood even before as a board member. It talks about blocks that cannot be successfully converted. And if we're going to be doing 100% electric, it seems like all of our blocks will need to be successfully converted at one point or another. So I guess my question for MTD, is it possible, do you see that there is the flexibility to change blocks and or to use the newest, most efficient vehicles on the blocks that are most difficult because of elevation gain?
Yeah, I can answer that. Yeah, I do believe we're better positioned than most transit operators, I think. Santa Barbara's always been fortunate by the service area, as well as the topography and the weather. And I think Stantec's report supports that. And when I look at those particular blocks and discussing it with staff, yeah, I do think we can come up with a strategy to handle it. And I also believe that over time, the batteries will improve. So I think we're well positioned, maybe not today to have it 100%, but as we roll out our ZEB plan over the next number of years, yeah, I think we'll be just fine.
Thank you. I concur with that. On page 8, it has driving cycles because we're trying to associate this with pre-existing information and modeling. And one of the drive cycles talks about the urban dynamometer driving, which is mostly freeway, and it talks about stops per minute as being 0.79. And then our 24X is actually, for I guess 2/3 of it is in this. And I'm just wondering, I know this is getting into the weeds, but it talks about stops per minute as being 0.79, which seems like a lot of stops per minute for our 24X. Is that really what it would work out to be in a total drive cycle? Because on the freeway, you don't stop at all.
Right, right. I'll direct that question to Annalie. Thanks.
So the stops won't necessarily mean like a complete stop into the driving cycle. It could also mean, reducing speed to accommodate the traffic, upcoming traffic. So it wouldn't be a little, stops per minute, but it also relates to the acceleration process of it. Now, when evaluating the driving cycles, it was a really a pleasure working with the staff at Santa Barbara, because they are the experts in terms of like what's the dynamic of the vehicles and in terms of these things like, what's freeway, what city. They were able to identify specific routes that have, a way of passage that's reduced, so the speed will have to get reduced significantly. So we try to work really closely with them to identify the best driving cycles assignments to the route. So I believe it was a pretty successful process in terms of understanding the topography and the driving dynamics. But for that one specifically, I would say it's not a literal number that, that the bus will come to a complete stop in terms of in the middle of the highway. But it's also a combination of, a highway with additional, during the measuring station, the measuring stage of the cycle could be significant to that. And I believe either in the report, or we can provide that as additional information. If you are more curious about it, we can provide the actual profile of like the speed versus time. So you can identify exactly which of those were complete stops. And then you were able to see during, a fraction of a minute or a minute and a half, how would that look like? So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you for that offer. That probably then becomes even more complex than my ability to analyze, but your explanation helps. I was just trying to get an understanding of that. The next one has to do with, maybe this is an MTD internal question because of the way that we provide statistics. One thing we're now talking about will be kilowatt hours in terms of fuel efficiency. And I guess, do we want to have a metrics which would be kilowatt hour per passenger and kilowatt per mile, and also the concomitant greenhouse gas reduction versus diesel. Eventually, as we shift the fleet, I think we might want to have more robust measurements of how this is working. That's just a comment. Next one has to do with, thanks as I'm scrolling through here. I guess one comment that I will make is, and I understand why this needs to be done, it does make sense that it's very, very conservative, and pretty much all the inputs have taken, as indicated, sort of the most extreme situation so that we can prepare in case that situation ever arises. Let me just go ahead and flip towards the end. Okay, in terms of, there's a lot of things that affect efficiency, and you've given us a whole series of them. And I'm just wondering if they were to be weighted, how they would stack up against each other. The things that affect efficiency of an electric vehicle are clearly the weight of the vehicle, passenger loading as well, the elevation gain associated with the block, HVAC use, and congestion. Those are all brought in as different factors and explained individually, but I haven't seen them cumulatively, how they, in terms of totality, stack up against each other in terms of affecting fuel efficiency.
And I would add to that is driver behavior, operator behavior. So,
well, I was wondering that too. Is that something that can be trained and something that can be improved over time with experience?
The answer is yes. So the driving behavior, operator behavior, I mean, is captured to a certain degree by the drive cycle that we were just discussing. But for sure, so we've worked with AVTA up in the Antelope Valley, and they see a range depending on operators in terms of fuel economy, exactly that, kilowatt hours per mile, and then the impact of different operators and incentivizing essentially better fuel economy by, training operators to drive for an electric bus. In terms of the totality of the inputs, that's exactly what our modeling is doing. So it's looking more at the sum of the parts versus the individual components of the inputs that affect fuel economy. So in terms of weighting, I mean, they're weighted as much as they need to be, and then sorry, let me rephrase that. They're not necessarily weighted, but their impact on the way the bus operates, and therefore how the fuel economy, the output, is in the model. And I'll ask Annalie to provide some more details of that, please.
Yeah, my pleasure. As you alluded to, they're all going to have a different impact. If there was one to be chosen as the one that will have the largest impact on drawing the energy from the battery, I will say it's probably the weather. And it's just in the sense that a lot of the other stuff can be in a way controlled. So for example, you have a bus that is always going on a challenging topography. That topography won't change, so you already have an idea of what that impact is going to look like. However, the weather, and more related to that, is how you control the AC and heating inside the bus. That will have a significant impact. It just through research, a lot of the concerns with the BEVs is extremely in cold weathers because of the heating aspect of it, something that you guys don't have much to worry about. And I'm jealous of that because I live in Idaho, so definitely not a concern for you in extreme weathers like you will see here or in Canada. And some of the things they do to mitigate that is to use external heating components to the bus to kind of alleviate some of that extra load that the buses will encounter. And again, in terms of the passenger capacity, because it's out of weight, the bus itself already has a significant weight, and adding passengers will definitely have an impact to it, but it's already capturing like kind of like the worst case scenario if you have like a full bus. So there is a sense of readiness that you can have to that versus having an extreme hot or cold day, and how the operator will manage that AC system inside of that, which is also related to how many stops the bus will have opening and closing the doors. And that's a lot of external aspects that are difficult to control, which then translated into a more of like uncertainty of how that weather would affect the fuel efficiency.
Well, thank you. That actually spurred one more question, because it sounded as if the HVAC use was an important factor of all those factors. And I'm just wondering, looking into the future to ensure our passengers' confidence in the safety of the air, that there may be a lot of need for air exchanges on all the new buses. So that may drive electrical use beyond what we currently experience. Next thing I wanted to mention is that when buses pull back into the terminals to be recharged, probably very few, if any of them, will need 100% charging. Some of them will need significantly less than even in the 80%, which is recommended. So I'm just wondering how that additional fudge factor has been built into the total expected charging needs versus saying every bus that comes in needs a 100% recharge.
Exactly, and that's what was considered in the charging profile.
Okay.
The amount that they come back with based on the fuel economy and the power they would need to go out if they do another block, for example.
Okay, that makes complete sense. I'm getting to the end, folks, so thank you for sticking with me. You gave us basically what our power needs will be. And I know we've talked about it, and I don't think we've done an analysis completely yet, but the ability to construct photovoltaics on Terminal 1 and Terminal 2, and what the estimated potential capacity would be. I'm just guessing that the two themselves, if they were fully built out, could maybe come up with 200 kilowatts. And so that's just a guess. And then I'm looking at our costs, and I don't know if this has been projected out, but to me it looked like, based on the numbers that have been provided, MTD would be spending around $2,750 a day on electricity to recharge the fleet, which actually works out to about $1 million a year for electricity. and that a photovoltaic array could reduce that by about $125,000 per year initially. I would like to ask staff, how much are we spending per year right now just on diesel fuel?
Well over that amount.
Well
I don't
over
have
that
an exact
amount.
figure for you.
Okay. Now, I don't know if my calculations are even ballpark or not to put that into there. So I just wanted to put that out there. Okay, I'm near the end here. Just regarding the accuracy of this report, in other similar applications, how accurate has ZEB Decide been in determining actual electrical use? You've got your projections, but then you can go back to the entity that you've actually done your work for and see how it matches up in reality. How is that working out?
I will preempt Annalie answering this question by saying that, the output fuel economies, which you have in the report, as well as we'll provide in a spreadsheet, is, somewhat within the range of, the OEM specs are obviously on the more advantageous side, but they do match up with what we've seen at other agencies that actually operate BEVs. But I'll ask Annalie to address the question.
Yeah, so we haven't been able to go back to a complete, several out to kind of measure that, because we're obviously at the early stages of that. But the component of Subdecide that does the energy modeling was actually developed during my PhD at the University of Irvine. So during that time, I was able to validate the results of the model with the expected fuel economy that their 20 buses of BEV fleet was kind of like having on the normal operationals of them. So that was like a great test bed for me, and to validate the model, to kind of like incorporate the different aspects of, the topography, the driving cycles, the passenger capacity, how that was estimated. So again, there hasn't been a full validation with the complete rollout set, because that hasn't happened yet, but at least the outputs of the model have been individually validated with the performance of the buses. And continuously, we keep doing like a review of what's the current efficiency, like David alluded to, not only, from those specific buses at UCI, but also through the efficiency of other buses and other transit agencies. And just to mention a few, in the terms of BEVs, Foothill has been doing extensive analysis of their vehicles, and there has been like well-recorded information from NREL, the national lab. And similar, we do the same with the fuel cell buses and the operations in different locations like AC Transit or Zoneline, to validate the projected fuel economies in different climates and topography. So we try to keep an active validation process of our assessment with what's been proven out there.
Okay, well, thank you again for your report. And just in closing, I was pleased to see that it looks like MTD Santa Barbara is a good candidate for a zero electric fleet. The last thing I wanted to ask is what consideration has been given to the fact that there's public safety power shutoffs, and that if we're completely dependent on electricity, what kind of planning we need to have the adequate backup storage to maintain service?
Yeah, I can respond to that. Yeah, that's a very serious concern for us, obviously. Before we can get to 100% of our fleet being electrified, we need to address the resiliency issue. One of the things we're working on as a staff, I think we reported, is we are working with the city of Santa Barbara as a partner to apply for the California Energy Commission's ZEB infrastructure, and that's for medium and heavy duty infrastructure blueprint. Rather than infrastructure, we're actually looking at working together with the city of Santa Barbara and their climate efforts as well to identify what kind of resiliency, photovoltaic, battery storage we can do here, and then build from that. And that the big question is going to be, I think, that we're going to have to address is, when we talk about resiliency, what are we asking? Are we saying we need 100% of the buses charged and ready to go all the time? What is the usual essentially brownout for the Edison area? Is it a 2-hour period? Is it a 3-day, 1 week? those are all the questions we need to address and ask ourselves. And we are going after that grant funding, and we're hopeful, optimistic that we'll be successful, but we need to submit that next week. It's a good opportunity for us.
Great. Thank you, Bill, for your questions. All of
Thank you
them
for
are good.
indulging me, Chair. Appreciate that.
Now, you asked many of my questions, so we've covered that base. Other questions from other board members? Vice Chair Tabor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Board Member Schiller. I always appreciate you going ahead of me, and I think your thoroughness is one of the reasons we reappoint you to the board when your term comes up. One thing I couldn't find the report, a very thorough report. Thank you for it. I was very impressed. In calculating the range of the BEBs, were we using 100% battery efficiency or a lower battery efficiency? I heard Annalee mention 80% was when the warranty kicked in. So were we using 100% battery efficiency to consider the ranges?
So go ahead, Annalee.
No, you go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, well, the idea is that let's say you start off with 100% of the battery, you can't use it 100%. It has to return to the yard with 20% of its charge. You can't go below that. So that's one constraint. And that was factored into the modeling. That's why you had several blocks, that failed. In terms of the degradation, I'll ask Annalee now to chime in. Thanks.
Sorry, I just heard my name and I couldn't jump to it. But no, I think what I was going to say is what David alluded to, that we consider there needs to be a 20% reserve in the battery for them to perform this. So that was like the only consideration in terms of the efficiency of the battery itself, and that's how we projected the efficiency of the buses. So basically you have that 20% as a fallback in terms of like, kind of like that green, that yellow light of empty tank kind of idea. But we did not consider battery degradation in the assessment.
Well, thank you. I always wondered what that little light was in my car. Now I know. Okay, so even with that conservative estimate, I was impressed with the report, and also impressed that such a low percentage of our blocks are unavailable to the buses that are available to us. That was much better than I expected. Thank you.
Other questions?
I'd just like to make one comment,
Go ahead, Dick.
and that is that I don't think I understand all I know about this subject.
Well, get in line, take a number.
And I'll get a private lesson before I
There you go.
open my mouth much more.
Paula, Director Perotti.
Dick, you're not alone. Don't worry. A lot of my questions that I had have been answered. I was with Olivia curious about the battery, how long it lasts. And so I think my questions have all been answered, and I want to thank you so much for the report. Very, very informative and exciting too. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Other comments, questions? I actually have, well, I guess we'd say two really nitpicky editorial questions or comments, and then one real question. On figure 2, the vehicle usage, I didn't see a color code. I know that color goes to the length of the buses, but that would have helped.
The bars, yeah.
Yeah, I'm doing, well, actually, in this case, it was the graphs on figure 2. And then on, okay, and then on figure 4, yes, on figure 4, then the bars changed from blue to orange or red, and it didn't really explain how or why at that lower range. Yes, you got the total mileage 180 cutoff line, but you didn't really explain the why the bars changed in color. So those are my editorial comments, which didn't change anything to the report. And my only real question then, on table 7, the maximum extreme slopes for topography categories, I was a little taken aback that Oak Park route, line 3, has maximum slope and extreme slope greater than the Mesa, right? That was one which it was just, again, I don't know the basics for that, but man, when you have the Mesa, you're going up Carrillo Hill and even over by City College coming back down to Castillo. And Oak Park seems to be pretty flat. So I was just curious how and why you had maximum slopes on line 3 of such degree. So
Yeah, thanks.
go ahead.
I was going to direct the question to Annalie because I think she was looking at that more closely.
Yes, thank you. So in terms of like how the slope changes can be a little difficult to explain, but I do my best. So we use elevation profiles that are provided through Google Earth, and in there you have the variation. It can be calculated kind of like differential. So they do this change not, you know, when you come and you encounter something big and you do the slope that way, but what they do is the differential aggregation of the elevation change. So what we did is we use first the max that is due through that, the average of the max to do the regular assessment, and to do the extreme case, we use like just the max of that. So there is a chance that even though to our eyes it seems like a big slope, in terms of how the elevation profiles is categorized is how the differential changes in elevation along the route can be more significant, and that ends up impacting more. So to this point, it's like you might be experiencing a change of elevation that your eye not necessarily is going to cut up, but in terms of how that is affecting the charging profile, the driving cycle, it has more of an impact because of a constant power outtake to kind of bring down through extensive periods of distance, versus just a lot of like, you know, a push to kind of get you through over the hill. But I hope that answers the question. But
Again, I'm not competent enough to basically get into the details. I was just more than anything, and I understand that. I just, again, intuitively looking at the line 3 route versus the line 5 route, even the elevation difference, they're different because one's a longer slope and the other one is a maximum slope. So again, I'll take that. Anyway, final comment just is, and I'll echo what everybody else has said. I really appreciated the report. Thank you very much for it, because I thought it was very informative to us. I think, in going back to Director Sheeler's question, it's a good baseline estimate at this point, which through adaptive management, as we grow the fleet, we'll learn more and basically be able to refine it as we go forward, as we get to full rollout. So again, thank you very much for that. And if there are no other questions, Jerry, Brian?
I see no comments or questions from the public.
Not with the question. Okay, good. Well, David, Annalie, Sasha, thank you very much for the report, and I look forward to working with you further as we move into, if you will, full rollout, heading towards full rollout. Thank you again for the report. Thanks for the presentation, David.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Okay, moving to our next item on the agenda. Item 8 is the approval of the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan. Mr. Estrada, you want to introduce?
Yeah, I'm going to hand this item off to Ms. Gregg, our Director of Human Resource Risk and Chief Safety Officer, to provide you with the update and the recommendation. Mary?
All right. Terrific. Thank you very much, Mr. Estrada, and good morning to all the members of the board, as well as our participants on the panel today from EasyLift. I'd like to welcome Mr. Paredes from EasyLift joining our panel today. This is the second presentation by staff in order to provide the fully completed agency safety plan, which incorporates now the EasyLift safety management systems that we've been working on for the last couple of months and prior to that. So in early September, staff made a presentation to the board with some noticeable enthusiasm that we had completed the agency safety plan under the PTASP final rule, which outlined all of the components required by the FTA in this PTASP final rule. The presentation at that time in early September presented what had been a completed plan after review from the FTA's Technical Assistance Center. It's a voluntary review. It's like a peer review where they go through and basically go through a checklist to make sure the components of everything are in your plan. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a compliance process. That's going to be part of the FTA triennial review, just as a reminder, a refresher on that front. So since September, we've been working with the team at EasyLift. I want to say a big thank you to Christina Latiero. She's the Director of Operations there, as well as Kelly Arredondo. He's the driver trainer, for their dedication and collaborative effort to put together EasyLift's version of their agency safety plan, which has been incorporated now into the final product that you see here today. So this would be the first plan in place. And because of that, staff is presenting a resolution to the board to adopt the plan. Every year thereafter, the FTA requires us to come back to the board to approve the plan and any changes that may take place. So in the future, it won't require a resolution, but for the first one, we are presenting today for the board's approval, Resolution 2020-05, in order to officially and formally adopt the plan. And that is staff's recommendation today. And I'm happy to answer any questions and also open the floor to Mr. Paredes if he has any comments or questions as well.
I'd like to go to Mr. Paredes now, and Ernesto, if you have any questions or comments that you want us to be aware of, it's a good time to get it out on the record. So good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Chair Davis and members of the board. I want to reciprocate the appreciation to Mary Gregg, who has been, again, such a great leader at MTD. And again, I'm not saying anything that you don't already know. It's been a pleasure in talking to our staff of the great working relationship that we all have. Again, this is, I'm saying things, I'll feel like a broken record sometimes, but I acknowledge about a little over a year ago at a CalAct conference that the acknowledgement of the safety plan was discussed, and there was a lot of urgency, a lot of panic in the room, I recall. And I was sitting next to Jerry, and again, the confidence that Jerry displayed back then put a lot of comfort to me, knowing that we have the resources, the mind power to address this and to work closely. And he said at the time, we're going to work with you. Don't worry, we got this. We got this. And sure enough, to his word, he devoted staff. We devoted staff, and now we have the product that we have in front of you. We understand that it's a fluid document. Like Mary said, there will be additions, deletions every year that we will bring back to the board for your review and potential approval. But again, it's something that we now believe we've always strived, very highly in regards to our safety plan at EasyLift. This has taken us to a new, better level, and so we're very appreciative of this. Again, this best practices, and again, we present this to you for your review and approval.
Great, thank you very much. And again, I appreciate the spirit of cooperation that you all put into it to make it all happen. And it shows in terms of the detail that we have in front of us. I'm going to go to board questions at this particular point. Board questions? I have one. Okay, not seeing any. I have one. On page 7, you have the safety performance targets, Mary.
Yes.
And those are basically, as I read it and tried to understand it, based on 5-year averages, which if I look at essentially the fixed route and I looked at the fatalities total that over 5 years, that's 3 fatalities over the 5-year, which gets the 0.6. Is that how, I'm assuming that's how that's derived. That's not my question though. Again, I was just trying to get understanding these things. So it's taken over this 5-year period or 4-year period or whatever. And so the baseline, the targets are basically set by how you've done. the way I see this. That those targets are essentially how you performed over the previous period. Does that mean then going out each year, it's a moving period of averages or a total of all the averages, or what happens to the targets over time and the annual reporting and updates?
And that's a great question. The FTA, let me back up. So the goal in the whole PTASP rule is for this to be flexible and scalable to each individual agency to meet the needs of that specific agency. So while there are specific components that are required to be in the plan, that the contents of them are defined by the actual agency. So right now, as everybody's moving forward and looking at best practices and communicating with all of the peers, this concept of a 5-year look back is what a lot of agencies are starting with. But in the future and long run, we have the flexibility and opportunity to determine at some point what time period we would like that to be. So I think the best way to answer the question is right now, we've looked at a 5-year period as a best practice. We could move that to a 7-year, or we could continue to have it being a rolling. So that is certainly something that as we move into implementing this, will be discussions and that we would bring back to the board as well in the future if we make a determination to change that.
That answers my question relative to the average. And then I guess my comment just is, again, to basically have a target for fatalities. That was the one that shook me up a little bit, because you would think in a safety plan, your target is 0, and maybe you have to report, but how we deal with that over time, I think will be something for further discussion. So I appreciate the clarification on that matter.
You're welcome.
Okay. Other questions? You've done such a good job. There aren't any questions. Okay. Jerry, Mr. Estrada, is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak on this item?
I don't see anyone requesting to speak on this item.
Okay. Then the recommendation is that the board adopt resolution number 2020-05 approving MTD's Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan. Is there a motion to that effect? I see a motion by Director Rodriguez. Is there a second?
I'd second that.
Oh, you got to beat Director Vice Chair Tabor got in there first. Okay, so I have a motion and a second. It is a roll call vote. And I will start at the top. Director Perotti.
Aye.
Director McCrory is absent. Director Weinberg. Raise your hand, Dick, if it's a yes. There you go. Good. Director Rodriguez. Yes.
Yes.
Director Sheeler.
Yes.
Vice Chair Tabor.
Yes.
And Chair Davis votes yes. And as a codicil or an addendum, just want to thank staff for all the work that went into this, because it was a Herculean effort thrown at us, and essentially, again, the cooperative effort between Easy Lift and MTD is always appreciated. But I know just individually for Mary and Ernesto, thank you both personally, because it's a great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, then. Takes us to item 9. Item 9 is the renewal of staff health insurance effective January 1st, 2021. January 1st, 2021, it's coming up.
I'm going to be handing this off to Mary Gregg again to provide you with the update and recommendation.
All right, well, switching gears to another subject, 2021. It does seem a little crazy that we're talking about 2021 already. So this is, staff is presenting to the board the annual renewal for staff health insurance. And that would be for those MTD employees that are not represented by a collective bargaining agreement. and that includes medical and dental insurance. The past few years, based on the marketplace, we've seen some, leveling off of some of the rates, which has netted a real positive effect for us from a budgetary standpoint. In the current environment within which we're in, with an increase in utilization of services, increase in costs for prescription medication, increase in additional usage for things for mental health services, there's a real push in the constraint within the marketplace. And we're seeing trends of increases in rates. MTD has seen a 10.6% increase, unfortunately, year over year to the premium rates. We had budgeted a 5% based on what we were seeing in the past previous 5-year trend. The 10.6% increase is in line with what's happening in the market. Right now, from a budgetary standpoint, with a snapshot in time, with the current number of staff, if nothing changes, meaning a single employee stays single, et cetera, we'd be looking at about a 7% increase over what we have budgeted. That nets about $58,000. And the policies will renew in January, and there are 2 separate policies. One is the medical insurance with Blue Shield HMO, and then dental insurance and life insurance under the Guardian label, if you will. And so with staff's recommendation to proceed, asking for board authorization for the general manager to approve the renewal of the policies, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions of Ms. Gregg? Well, you answered my question. So if Jerry, is there anyone who wishes to speak from the public?
I don't see any requests for comment.
Okay, that takes us to a vote. The recommendation, as Mary has indicated, is to authorize the general manager to renew the health insurance for the plan year effective January 1st, 2021. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Motion by Director Perotti. Is there a second?
Second.
Director Weinberg has seconded. Okay, I will go to the roll call vote. Director Perotti.
Aye.
Director McCrory is absent. Director Weinberg.
Aye.
Director Rodriguez.
Aye.
Director Sheeler.
Yes.
Vice Chair Tabor.
Yes.
And Chair Davis votes yes. The resolution is adopted.
Mr.
Excellent.
Chair, can I ask what Mary Gregg's been doing in her spare time?
Yeah. I think you can guess. Take a breath, Mary. Take a breath. Yeah, really. Okay. Thank you all for that. Thank you, Mary, for the presentation on that one also. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much to the board.
Okay. That takes us to item 10. This is the general manager's report. Mr. Estrada.
Yeah, I'll be brief and be prepared to answer any questions you might have. I think the top item that I wanted to share with you is that our planning staff and our operations team are working together for towards the November bid process for our drivers. The reason that's really such a significant event for us is that bid will span well into the first part of 2021 and schools reopening. So, Hillary Blackerby, our planning and market managers, work closely with the local school district to try to get a feel for what those bell times are going to be, what days of the week. And the planning team has put in a lot of work to try and get this lined up. We're hoping this is the last plan we're able to coordinate, but we'll do the best we can to serve. Come February when schools reopen, we will still likely have the maximum passenger restriction on board the vehicles. So we've shared all that information with local schools, and we'll be prepared to do our best. And our operations team, I think, is managing things as well as anyone out there. So, kudos to them as well. Beyond that, there are a few other items in there, but that's really the top one that I wanted to share with you. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions, Director Rodriguez.
Have the schools done any kind of assessment on the need for the bus, you know, for bus services? I mean, have they gone to their parents and said, are you coming back? Are you not coming back? You know, are you going to be using transportation? Have they done anything in coordination with us or on their own?
I believe Ms. Blackerby, as well as the Santa Barbara Unified School District, have worked closely, and there've been a lot of input from public, from parents and everyone else. And, you know, they have their own school buses as well that they manage. And there's been communication about that, but I don't know if it's been a full-blown survey results. I think your guess is as good as mine, but we need to be prepared as best we can to help.
Can someone get me updated? Is Santa Barbara City College and UCSB, are they going back in January?
My understanding of both is that they are not in a significant way. There will be some on campus. There's employees, and we do have our baseline core services for both UCSB and City College, which have not been affected during the pandemic. We've maintained those services. The other ones, for example, the 15X between Isla Vista to City College, or the 16X, which goes from the transit center up to City College as well, those continue to be suspended, and likely that will continue through the first part of the year.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Other questions? Director Sheeler.
Thank you, Chair. One question and one comment. This general manager's report indicated that submittals in response to the combined requests for the development of the MTD Cariel property yielded 3 submittals. Are you able to disclose who submitted?
I think the next step for us is to evaluate them and meet with the ad hoc committee before we publicly disclose anything. So we're still in that process. So that would be the next step.
Okay. And the last one, I guess, is a question. Jerry, do you think that there should be an asterisk on the Dodgers World Championship?
Not at all.
I can't, Director Sheeler, I am surprised that you even asked that question. My goodness. So,
Well, Jerry's a tough critic, and if he says not at all, then I'm good with that.
yeah.
Director Sheeler knows I'm an A's fan. I'm disappointed, but happy for the Dodger fans. It was been a rough year for anyone to win a championship.
Good point.
Okay. I only have one comment, and that is just, again, 2 of our other insurance things are going up. And it looks like insurance is going up all over the place. And so it's just a comment of just, I did pick that up, that after the previous report and then looking at the D&O, make sure you cover that D&O.
We have.
Yes, thank you very much.
Chair?
Anyway, go ahead.
As it turned out, I did have one more thing. Maybe staff can help a little bit. I got an email from SBCAG regarding hearing on unmet transit needs. Do you know anything about that? Is that something that we should be paying attention to?
Yes, that's an annual process. It's attributable to the Transportation Development Act. Every year, SBCAG has an unmet transit needs, and they do both South County and North County. And there are comments from folks, and we do monitor that to see what kind of comments there are related to our service in South County. However, we use all of the TDA funds in the South County for public transit. So they're good comments or suggestions. We take them into consideration, but we're already using all the funding. In North County, maybe historically, not all the TDA funds were used for transit. Some of it might have been flexed for public works, roadway type work. And in that case, they really have to take a good look at what those comments are and see if it's reasonable to meet. So it's that process, at least that's my understanding of it. But
Are they aware that MTD's pilot micro transit program?
I'm sorry, what was that question?
Is SBCAG and people who are following SBCAG regarding transit needs, unmet transit needs, aware of MTD's potential pilot micro transit project?
Yes, we actually, Ms. Blackerby provided SBCAG Board of Directors with a presentation last year on this topic. We appreciated the opportunity. So the leadership there is certainly familiar with it. And as we get to the point where we're ready to roll out that service, it's really come down to acquiring the right type of vehicle. But as soon as we're ready, we'll certainly be doing our marketing push on that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, one last comment. I was just pleased to see the application, that we're part of the application for the Sustainable Transportation Equity Project to develop an Isla Vista community mobility plan. So thanks staff for basically getting involved with that. I am curious to see where this might go with MTD. So again, just a notation. Thank you for putting that in the report to keep us abreast.
Yep, good news.
Okay. And nothing else here. We'll go to item 11, other business and reports. Any committee meetings? Not seeing any. Any other transit news? Not seeing any. Okay. It takes us to item 12. This is a recess to closed session, public employee performance evaluation. The board will meet in closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 54957 and 54954.5 subsection E to evaluate the performance of the district's general manager. We do take public comment. General Manager Estrada, is there any public comment on this item?
I do not see any.
Okay, not seeing any. We will stand in recess in closed session, and we'll come back out at some point to adjourn the meeting after the closed session item itself. So, Jerry, I'm going to take a 2 or 3 minute break to let everybody basically take care of whatever. We'll come back here in 3 minutes, and at that point, we should be closed up and the meeting locked. By the way, if anybody falls out of the meeting, right, you need to text Jerry to let him know, because he'll have to basically then unlock the meeting, let you back in if that happens. I've had that in meetings where people, for some reason, stepped out, but once the meeting's locked, you can't get back in without him letting you do that. Okay, 3 minute break. We'll be right back.